Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. Today we'll be going over a game played in 2016 at the Chess Olympiad in Azerbaijan by yours truly, FM Davy, and I am Meftahi Hossein. The game involved a very interesting position that we will see earlier, in which we had almost 7 pawns versus 1 rook. So we'll be diving deep into that game, and without much ado, let's jump right into it. Well, of course, first, if you're liking the content here, please sure to hit that subscribe button and also to drop a like on the video. So FM Davy, which is me, of course, opened with e4. Hassim replied with c5, so we have the Sicilian defense on the board. I replied with knight f3, and he replied with knight c6. Now, during this time in my chess career, I was experimenting with the Rosalimo, some of these offbeat systems a lot. So, of course, I went bishop b5. We had e6 on the board, and I took on e6. He played b takes, and I played b3. Knight e7, just continuing the development, and I went bishop b2 to exert some pressure along the a1 h8 diagonal. Hossein played knight g6, and I immediately replied with h4, trying to play h5 to push the knight back. So of course black played h5 himself to prevent that from happening, and I replied e5. So the idea behind e5 is if black goes d6 or d5, I will take the pawn on d6. Bishop e7 was played, attacking the pawn on h4, and I played g3 to protect the pawn. f6 was played, and I played queen e2, that's adding some more defense to the e5 pawn, and also threatening queen e4 to put some pressure on the knight on g6. Hassim replied rook b8, and I replied d3. And immediately he played c4. Now the position is slightly difficult for black already, but maybe c4 was too early in the given position. So of course, me being me, I took this pawn because it's not a pawn, and free pawns are quite nice. But let's see how the game continues. Maybe it's not so much of a free pawn. He played c5, threatening to go bishop b7 just to give the bishop some room on this diagonal. I went queen d3 to apply some pressure to the knight on g6, and he defended with king f7. I went knight bd2, just completing my development. He went f5, and I castled queenside with ideas of moving this knight to maybe f1 and exerting some pressure on the pawn on b7. He went bishop b7 to exert some pressure on the diagonal. I went rook e1 just to move the rook out of harm's way. Bishop c6, overprotecting the pawn on d7, and I went knight g1. Queen a5. So now technically black 2 has completed its development. The rooks are connected. He's threatening a pawn on a2, so of course I defended that pawn with king b1. He went queen back to c7, just waiting a bit to see what my plans are, and I started to reveal it. Knight h3. He went bishop queen b7, putting some more control over this diagonal, and maybe ideas of a5 a4 to just open the king side and get some activity going. I went knight f1 and rook h d8, again adding some more defenders to the d7 pawn. And in this position, coming up with a good move or a good plan was a little difficult, I now realize that maybe the knight to f1 plan was not working. So having assessed the position, I decided to play knight back to d2. And he went a5. Of course, he needs to drum up some counterplay on the queen side, and I went queen e3. He went a4, and I went knight g5 check. He played king to g8, and I went queen e2 to attack the pawn on h5. He decided to remove this knight because queen and knight works best. He could probably get checkmated in that position. I took back the bishop, and he went back to king to f7. And of course, I took the pawn on h5. So that is the second pawn. He took on b3, and I took with the a pawn. He then played rook h8 to harass the queen a bit, and the queen goes back to e2. Rook h3 was played, so he's trying to get some play on the queen side. Even though he's down 2 pawns, the plans are not so easy, and white needs to be precise. I went queen e3, and just to add some protection to g3 so that I can go f4 in the future. Queen a7 was played, and I played knight f1. So of course, it's the second time this knight is going to f1, and the plan here wasn't so clear, but in post analysis I saw that f4 was the best move, just to continue with the plan of protecting g3 and going f4. And now if rook a8, it's interesting to note that checkmating the king in this position is extremely difficult because of the dark square bishop. There will never be a check on a1, and king c1 could be played here. And if queen a5, displaying a constructive move, and of course defending the pawn on c5, I could go knight b1, and if queen b4, knight c3. And white is clearly much better in this position. Black can't deliver a checkmate, and slowly white will just start to unwind and to let the material advantage show. However, back to the game, I went knight f1, and knight h4 was played. There is a pin on this diagonal. I went rook e2, aiming to go rook d2 to put some more pressure on d7. Knight f3 was played, and I went queen to f4. Rook a8 was played. Of course, there's no mate along this a file, and I went rook e3, threatening to play rook takes knight. The knight went to d4, and I played bishop takes d4. So in some lines now there is definitely a mate on h1. He took, and I played queen takes d4. So that is the third pawn I am taking. So now I am up 3 pawns. Queen a2 was played, king c2, and rook h1. So in this position, black has created some problems for white, but all in all, white should just be winning with good play. But time was low on the clock, and that's where mistakes creep in. So rook e1 was played, and the bishop f3. So the rook on d1 is under attack, and in this position I took a 4th pawn on d7. Black played king g8, bringing the king to safety, well, a bit. And in this position I went g6. Now the problem with g6 is it did slip a significant portion of the advantage, and after this move, white has to be careful not to drop significant amount of material. But this was Move 39, we needed to play 2 moves to reach a time control to get an additional 30 minutes. So blunders do tend to creep in around this point of the game. So the correct move in this position was queen takes e6, and after king h8, I needed to play queen d6, give back some of the material and prevent the rook from going to d8, giving a check, and king takes, and this position is completely winning now for white. But okay, back to the game. So after g6, he played bishop takes d1, and I played king takes d1, and rook takes f1 was played, and I replied rook takes f1, and he played queen b1 check. Now in this position, I sat for quite a bit to examine what was happening in this current position. The important point to note is the king has 2 moves, has 2 squares to go to, d2 or e2, and one of them is winning, the other is completely losing. So maybe you can take a pause and guess which one is winning and which one is losing. So in the game, I did play king d2 to give up the rook on f1, and that is in fact the only move. King e2 walks into queen takes c2 check, and of course, if king f3, there's queen e4 checkmate, and if king e3, there is again queen e4 check, king d2, and rook a2, and the position would be lost for white. So white has to be careful, and the only move to continue the game is of course just king d2 and to give up a whole rook. So queen takes f1 was played, and now we have to assess this current position on the board. I have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 pawns. Black has 3 pawns, however he has a rook, but of course it is now white to play. So white starts action by taking on e6. So that is 1 more pawn. So in terms of material count, it is now equal. King h8 was played, and I took 1 more pawn on f5. So for the moment, none of the pawns are hanging, and the position remains slightly uncleared. But let's see what happens in the game. Yusuf Hossein played rook d8 check. I replied with king e3, and he played queen e1 check in this position, and this is almost a losing move. In this position, he already had to take care in the position and to play the queen h1, which is almost the only move. Ideas being, if king f4, there is ideas of king g8 that's trying to hold for a draw, and also maybe rook d4 check, and main point being if king g5, there's a queen h6 checkmate. So already queen h1 had to be played, and the game could probably end in a draw, but still white does have some chances in that position as well. So back to the game. He played queen e1 check, and the king went to e3, and he replied no with queen h1 check when it is a little too late. The king went up to g4, and he played rook e8. And in this position, I played the calm c3 and say, hey, it's your move. What are you going to play now? He played queen d1 check, and I replied f3. So the king is nicely tucked away behind a lot of pawns. He took the pawn on b3. I played queen h5 check. The king went to g8. Queen h7 check was played. King f8, queen h8 check, king e7, and queen takes g7. So in this current position, black has no pawns. White has 6 pawns versus the rook, but the g7 pawn is 2 moves away from queening. The pawn on the e file is 3 moves away from queening. So let's see how the game continues. King d8 was played, followed by queen f6 check. The rook went to e7, and queen d6 check was played. King went over to e8. There was queen c6 check, king f8, and f4. Continue rolling the passed pawns. The queen went to b7, and in this position I played queen takes b7. He replied rook takes b7, and I played f5. So now I am playing with 6 pawns versus the rook, and I am trying to queen the pawns. He played rook c7, going to take the c pawns, especially the 1 and c4 with a check, and I played f6. And f6 does slip some advantage, but black has to be careful. Rook takes c4 was played, and king f5. He took the pawn on c3, so now I have only 4 pawns left. So I'm trying to make a queen. I played g7 check. The king went to g8, and then I played g4. The main idea being to play king g6, but in this current position, rook takes g3 would be a check and losing the pawn. So g4 was played, and in this current position, black has 1 chance to play for a draw, and that move is rook c5. He must keep the pawn on e5 in check and not allow the king to advance. For example, if the king goes to e6, he could play rook a5 and threatening to play rook a6 check, rook back to a5, repeating the position. And if I were to play some moves like f7 check, king takes f7, and if g5, he has enough checks to maintain the balance in the position. But king g7 was played, and I went g5, and again there was the chance to play rook a5, but that was missed, and he went rook f3 check, and the king enters on e6. King g8 was played, and the king went to e7. Rook f1 was played, and now e6. The pawns are rolling. They are extremely close to making a queen. The rook went to f5, and the king went to e8, just to push that pawn all the way through. The rook went back to f1, and f7 check was played. King takes g7, and now g6. So of course, the idea behind g6 is that e7 will be played next, and the pawns will queen. He played king h8. I went e7, and he played rook takes f7. One last final trick. I hope that you guys can see it. If king takes f7, that is stalemate. So of course, I don't want to waste such a beautiful game. I played g takes f7, and it was in this position on move 72 that my opponent resigned, and I got the point for my team. So this game was really interesting. I was working with 4 pawns versus a rook and had to push them carefully. In a few of the position, the advantage did slip just a little, but when your opponent clock is running too, he also has to find the correct moves, and of course he did not find them. He missed rook c5 2 times, which would have made the position a little more difficult for white to continue, but okay. The play and the fight continues. All right guys, so if you did like this video, please sure to drop a like on the video and to also hit the subscribe button and to stay tuned because more interesting analytics are coming your way. Have a good one, stay safe, peace.